All right, so you know how sometimes you stumble across a phrase and it just kind of stops you in your
Oh,
tracks?
absolutely. Like a mental speed bump.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happened to me with this whole idea of I am honest. It sounds so simple, right?
Mm.
But the more you think about it, well, it's like the statement itself kind of unravels.
Yeah.
And that's precisely what we're diving into today.
It's a great example of how something seemingly straightforward can lead you down a fascinating philosophical rabbit hole.
Right. So you sent me this Stanford Encyclopedia philosophy entry on modesty and humility, and wow, just wow, it's amazing how much there is to unpack.
Oh, it's a rich topic for sure, and it's been a focal point for philosophers for centuries.
And I think that's what's so cool about this deep dive. We're not just defining terms,
Hmm.
we're exploring how these concepts have been wrestled with, debated, and redefined over time.
Exactly. And in doing so, we gain a deeper understanding of ourselves, how we view ourselves, and how we interact with the world around us.
So, to kick things off, there's this concept of the ethical blind spot, which I thought was a super interesting way to frame the whole I am modest dilemma.
Ah, yes, Sorensen's idea. The basic question is, if you are aware of your own modesty, does that awareness negate the modesty itself?
It's a bit like trying to sneak up on yourself, isn't it?
It really is, and it raises this fundamental question about the nature of virtue. Can you be virtuous, truly virtuous, if you're constantly aware of being virtuous?
That's a good point. We often think of virtue as something you strive for, something you're conscious of, that, like you said, a mental speed bump, you're thinking about it.
Right. And, that ties into another interesting aspect of this, the idea of virtue as knowledge. Like,
Hmm.
is being good simply a matter of knowing what's good?
I see what you mean. If modesty requires a kind of unawareness, does that challenge the idea that virtue is directly tied to knowledge?
It definitely complicates things. Like, take Plato's view, for example. He famously argued that virtue is knowledge. But then you have modesty, which seems to suggest maybe there's more to it than just having the right information.
It really highlights how our relationship with ourselves is different from our relationship with others.
Mhm.
We can see virtues in others pretty clearly, but judging our own, it's a whole other ballgame.
Totally. It's like looking through a different lens. And that difference in perspective is something philosophers have grappled with a lot when it comes to defining modesty and humility.
Yeah, speaking of definitions, even pinning down what we mean by modesty and humility seems to be a point of contention among philosophers. Some seem to use the terms interchangeably, right?
That's right. You've got thinkers like Hare, Schuler, and Herke who don't really draw a hard line between the two. They see them as closely related concepts.
But then you have others who are much more specific, like, for example, Statman and Sinha. They had different ideas about the domains of modesty and humility, whether they play out more in the public sphere or the private sphere.
Right. And then there's the whole question of knowledge and self-assessment. Ben Zaev and Yu Yen argued that humility requires you to underestimate yourself, while Driver suggested the opposite, that modesty involves not fully grasping your own positive qualities.
It's like everyone's got their own philosophical lens for
Yeah.
looking at these concepts.
It speaks to the nuanced and multifaceted nature of modesty and humility. For our discussion, it's helpful to think of them both as a general response to your own goodness or achievements, the way the encyclopedia approaches it. But we'll definitely keep in mind these specific distinctions that various philosophers have made.
Sounds like a plan. So let's dig into some of the key features that philosophers have identified when it comes to modesty. One that stood out to me was this idea from Sloat about modesty being a dependent virtue. What's that all about?
Well, Slut's point was that modesty isn't some kind of free-floating virtue. It's always about something else. So you can be modest about your talents, your achievements, your looks, even your good deeds. It needs another positive quality to lash onto.
I get it. It's like modesty needs a foundation, some other good thing to be modest about.
Precisely. And this raises the interesting question. Does that original good quality have to be objectively real? Or can you be modest about something you believe you possess, even if it's not necessarily true?
That's a really good question. Like, if someone thinks they're super intelligent but they're not, can they still be genuinely modest about their intelligence?
It's a tricky one, and things get even more complex when you consider Bomarito's idea that we can even be modest about other people's achievements.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Well, his argument is that if someone else's achievements reflect positively on us in some way, we can feel modest about it. Like if your child wins a prestigious award, you might feel a sense of pride, but also a kind of humility because their success somehow reflects on you as a parent.
I can see that. It's like a shared accomplishment in a way. But then you've got thinkers like Ben Zayev and Alistu,
Hmm.
who argue that modesty isn't dependent at all. How do they explain that?
Their view suggests that maybe modesty is more about a fundamental attitude towards yourself and others, not necessarily tied to specific accomplishments. It could be about not overvaluing your own contributions, regardless of what they are.
So it's more about a general stance of humility than a response to specific situations.
Exactly. It's about your overall approach, not just your reaction to certain events.
Okay, and another crucial aspect of this whole modesty discussion is the distinction between genuine modesty and false modesty.
Hmm.
We all know those people who put on a humble act,
Yeah.
but it's just that, an act.
Oh, absolutely. And philosophers are very clear that true modesty is not just about behavior, it's about what's going on internally.
So there needs to be a certain sincerity behind it. It can't just be a performance.
Exactly. If modesty were simply a matter of acting humble, then someone who is secretly arrogant but pretends to be modest would be considered modest. And that just doesn't seem right, does it?
No, not at all. It's got to be more to it than just putting on a show.
Agreed. And that brings us to what I think is one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole discussion. The almost universal agreement that saying, I am modest, sounds, well, immodest.
It's so strange, right? Like, the statement itself seems to undermine the very quality it's trying to claim. It's almost like a self-destruct button.
It is. And philosophers have had a lot of fun trying to figure out why that is. Sorensen and Driver both pointed out that the act of self-attributing modesty seems to cancel itself out. It's like trying to pat yourself on the back for being humble.
Yeah, it just doesn't work. And Bernard Williams even suggested that even thinking about your own modesty can make you less modest.
It's like a catch-22. Modesty seems to require a certain lack of self-focus, but the moment you start analyzing your own level of modesty, you're kind of breaking that rule.
It makes you wonder if modesty is even something you can actively cultivate, or if it's more of a natural disposition that you either have or don't have.
That's a great question. And it leads us to another big debate. Do philosophers even agree that modesty is a virtue?
Right. We've talked about all these different features and complexities, but is there even a consensus on whether modesty is something to be admired?
Well, as the encyclopedia mentions, there have been some big names who were a bit skeptical. Aristotle, for instance.
Oh, interesting. Why was Aristotle hesitant about modesty?
Well, Brennan and Ratterman argue that it's because his ideal of a virtuous person was the great-souled man. This was someone who was aware of his own worth and didn't shy away from acknowledging his own greatness.
That sounds pretty different from our modern idea of modesty. Someone openly proclaiming their greatness that doesn't exactly scream humble.
I know, right? It seems almost, well, boastful. But Driver points out that there's another interpretation of Aristotle's work, particularly around the Greek term eidadous, which can mean both modesty and shame.
Ah, so maybe there's more nuance to Aristotle's view than initially meets the eye.
Exactly. Some scholars argue that even Aristotle saw value in a truthful person understating their accomplishments, even if they weren't afraid to acknowledge them. And other Greek thinkers, like Epictetus, definitely considered eidadous a virtue.
So even way back then, there were different perspectives on this. It wasn't a simple black and white issue.
Definitely not. And that complexity carries through to other philosophical traditions as well. Take Hume, for instance.
Right. Hume, he had some interesting things to say about modesty.
He did. He famously categorized modesty as one of the monkish virtues.
Monkish virtues. Now, that's a term you don't hear every day.
I know, right? It's quite a label. Basically, he saw modesty as being in the same category as things like celibacy and fasting virtues that he felt were more about self-denial than genuine moral goodness.
So he thought modesty could actually be a hindrance to true virtue.
That was part of his concern. He felt that these monkish virtues could make people withdraw from the world and stifle their natural inclinations.
So in a way, he was saying that too much modesty could make you less effective in the world.
Yeah, that was his thinking. But it's important to note that even Hume had a more positive view of modesty in certain contexts. He saw it as a sign of good judgment in young people, a way to encourage learning, and a quality that helps smooth social interactions.
It's interesting how these historical figures wrestled with these ideas. It shows that even back then, people were trying to figure out the role of modesty in a good life. And speaking of historical figures, we can't forget Benjamin Franklin.
Ah, yes, the quintessential American virtue enthusiast.
He initially left humility off his list of virtues, but later added it, and get this, he said it meant to imitate Jesus and Socrates.
That's setting the bar pretty high. But it also highlights how the understanding of humility can evolve and be shaped by different cultural and ethical influences.
So what's the general consensus among philosophers today?
Well, according to the encyclopedia, most contemporary thinkers generally accept modesty and humility as virtues.
Okay, so we've moved away from skepticism and embraced these qualities.
It seems that way. There are several reasons for this shift. Some philosophers point to theological arguments, like Aquinas' view that humility is essential for receiving divine grace. Others focus on the social benefits of modesty, arguing that it promotes harmonious relationships and reduces conflict.
So modesty is a social lubricant.
Exactly. And there are also arguments based on the underlying psychological attitudes associated with modesty, like kindness, compassion, and a genuine concern for others. And finally, there's the argument that recognizing the fundamental moral equality of all people naturally leads to a sense of humility about our own relative importance.
It sounds like the emphasis has shifted from modesty as self-effacement to modesty as a way of being in right relationship with yourself and others.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads us to the different philosophical accounts of how modesty and humility actually work. We've got belief-based accounts and non-belief-based accounts.
Okay, let's start with the belief-based ones. What's the core idea there?
These accounts, which are often called doxastic accounts, explain modesty in terms of the beliefs we hold about ourselves, particularly our self-evaluations regarding our abilities, worth, and achievements. And within this category, we have two main types: ignorance accounts and accuracy accounts.
Got it. So ignorance accounts, those suggest that modesty involves some degree of not knowing, right?
That's the basic idea. Julia Driver's work is a great example of this approach. She argues that a modest person, in a specific way, is unaware of or underestimates their own good qualities.
So it's not about having a negative self-image, but about not fully recognizing or appreciating your positive trait.
Exactly. And Driver even suggests that this kind of not knowing is a feature of other virtues as well, like selfless charity, where you might not be fully aware of the impact of your actions.
Okay, so on this view, modesty isn't necessarily about putting yourself down, but about not constantly focusing on your good points.
That's a good way to put it. It's about having a certain humility about your own strengths and accomplishments.
But then we have the accuracy accounts, which take a different approach.
Right. These accounts argue that virtue should be based on having true beliefs. So, being modest, according to these views, is about seeing yourself accurately without any intentional downplaying or ignorance.
So it's about getting the assessment right, even if it means acknowledging your own positive qualities.
Precisely. And within this category, we have strong accuracy accounts and weak accuracy accounts.
Okay, break those down for me. What's the difference?
Well, think of strong accuracy as the view that being modest is fundamentally about seeing yourself and others correctly. No sugarcoating, no false humility. Egalitarian views, like those of Benzayev and Hare, fall into this category.
So they're saying that true modesty comes from recognizing the equal moral worth of all people, regardless of their talents or achievements?
Exactly. It's about understanding that your achievements don't make you inherently superior to anyone else. On this view, modesty isn't about thinking less of yourself, but about recognizing that everyone has inherent value, regardless of their accomplishments.
I can see how that fits with the idea of strong accuracy. It's about having a clear and accurate understanding of the moral landscape.
Right. And this perspective might even argue that modesty isn't a dependent virtue at all. You can recognize this equal moral worth even if you don't possess great qualities yourself.
And that someone who denies this equality can't truly be modest.
Exactly. Because their self-assessment is fundamentally flawed. They're overvaluing themselves in relation to others.
That makes sense. So what are some other examples of strong accuracy accounts?
Well, there's the view attributed to Adam Smith and defended by Brennan, which suggests that modest people might evaluate themselves against a very high standard while judging others by more everyday standards. It's like holding yourself to an almost impossible ideal while being more forgiving of others.
That's interesting. It's like you're saying, I'm not that great, even though I'm trying really hard, but you're doing just fine.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a way to reconcile accurate self-perception with humility. And then there's McMullen, who adds another layer to this. He argues that modest people are not only aware of their own qualities, but also aware of how those qualities are perceived by others, and they have a genuine concern for others' well-being.
So it's not just about seeing yourself accurately, but about being aware of the social dynamics at play and taking others' feelings into account. So that's strong accuracy. What about weak accuracy?
Weak accuracy accounts aim to find a middle ground. They suggest that while modesty doesn't require you to underestimate yourself, it's not incompatible with doing so either.
So you can still be modest even if you have a pretty good grasp of your own strengths.
Exactly, as long as you don't overinflate them or boast about them. And one example of this is the non-overestimation account, championed by Flanagan and Richards. It basically states that modesty means not having an exaggerated view of your own good qualities.
Okay, so you can be aware of your talents and accomplishments without being immodest, as long as you keep things in perspective.
Precisely. And underestimating yourself would also fit into this view, but it's not a requirement. And then you've got Ridge's de-emphasis account, which focuses on the act of downplaying your achievements for the right reasons, like not wanting to make others feel bad or to avoid seeming arrogant. And finally, there's Ratterman's reluctance account, which sees modesty as a hesitation to define yourself solely based on your positive traits.
It's fascinating how many different ways philosophers have tried to pin down this idea of accuracy in relation to modesty.
It really is, and it shows just how complex these concepts are.
Yeah.
But we've only explored the belief-based accounts so far. Now let's move on to the non-doxastic accounts.
Bring on the non-doxastic. What's the key difference here?
Non-doxastic accounts shift the focus away from beliefs about oneself and instead emphasize other aspects of our mental and emotional lives, like attitudes, emotions, motivations, or even behaviors.
So it's not just about what you think about yourself, but about how you feel and act.
Exactly. And there are a lot of different flavors of non-doxastic accounts. One example is Herke's proportion account. He argues that modesty is about having the right emotional response to the goodness of something, whether it's your own quality or someone else's. It's about your pride or lack thereof being proportionate to the actual value.
So if someone achieves something truly remarkable, it's okay to feel a certain amount of pride, but that pride shouldn't be overblown or out of proportion to the accomplishment itself.
Precisely. It's about keeping things in perspective, emotionally speaking. And then you have what are called indifference accounts, like those of Schuller and Arpely and Schroeder, who see modesty as stemming from a lack of concern for external validation. It's about not caring too much about praise or high status.
So it's about being internally grounded, not seeking external validation.
Exactly. It's about finding your worth and value from within, not from what others think of you. Roberts and Wood have a similar view for humility, linking it to a lack of vanity. And the encyclopedia points out that this resonates with Eastern philosophical traditions, like Buddhism, which emphasize detachment from external approval.
It's fascinating how these different philosophical traditions converge on similar ideas.
It is. And then we have Maas's asymmetry account, which looks at social norms and how they influence our understanding of modesty. He points out that it's considered acceptable to praise others for their accomplishments, but not to praise yourself in the same way.
Oh, I see. It's like the difference between giving someone a standing ovation and giving yourself one. One's totally normal, the other's just weird.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that different norms govern self-perception and self-promotion compared to how we perceive and talk about others.
Okay, so we've got proportion, indifference, and asymmetry. What other non-doxastic accounts are there?
Well, there are the kindness accounts, championed by thinkers like Woodcock, Wilson, and Sinha. They see modesty as a form of benevolence, a way of valuing others and not wanting to make them feel inferior. So modesty, on this view, is about considering the impact of your actions and words on others' well-being.
It's about being mindful of the social dynamics at play and not wanting to create a hierarchy or make others feel less than.
Exactly. It's about fostering a sense of equality and shared worth.
And then there are the attention accounts, right?
Right. These focus on where you direct your mental focus. Thinkers like Bomarito and Rashdal argue that a modest person doesn't dwell on their own good qualities, but pays attention to external factors and the contributions of others. It's about recognizing that your achievements are often the result of a complex interplay of factors, not solely your own efforts.
So it's about having a more holistic view of success and achievement, recognizing the role of luck, circumstance, and the support of others.
Exactly. And finally, we have what are called executive accounts. These see modesty as a virtue that helps you practice other virtues. Thinkers like Statman, Murdoch, Foley, and even Kant and Sidgwick saw it as a way to regulate your ego and keep your less-than-ideal tendencies in check. It's like having a built-in humility mechanism that helps you stay grounded and focused on what really matters.
It's like modesty acts as a kind of inner compass, guiding you toward virtuous action.
Precisely. It helps you navigate the complexities of moral decision-making by keeping your ego in check and reminding you of your own fallibility.
This is all so fascinating. It's amazing how many different angles philosophers have taken on this seemingly simple concept of modesty.
It really is. It shows just how rich and multifaceted these ideas are. But we've only scratched the surface of one aspect of this: moral modesty. The encyclopedia also delves into how these ideas apply to our beliefs and knowledge with the concept of intellectual humility.
All right, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about intellectual humility. How does that fit into this whole discussion?
Intellectual humility takes the core ideas of modesty and humility and applies them to the realm of what we believe and know. It's about having a modest attitude towards your own intellectual abilities and being open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
I can already feel my ego resisting this.
I know, right? It's not always easy to admit that we might not have all the answers, but that's precisely what intellectual humility is all about. One particularly intriguing area of this discussion is the concept of anti-expertise.
Anti-expertise, what's that all about?
It's the idea of being reliably wrong about something. Philosophers like Sorensen, Egan, and Elga and Cohn have explored the paradox of whether you can rationally believe yourself to be an anti-expert.
So it's like saying, I'm really good at being bad at this.
Exactly. It creates this weird self-referential loop, much like the paradox of saying, I am modest. If you're truly an anti-expert, wouldn't you be wrong about even that?
It's a mind bender for sure.
Yeah.
So how do you even navigate that kind of intellectual humility?
Well, it's about being willing to acknowledge the limits of your own knowledge and to be open to the possibility that others might know more than you, even if it challenges your own beliefs. And this ties into another interesting aspect of intellectual humility: how we respond to disagreements with others who seem equally knowledgeable.
Oh, that's a good one. It's so easy to dig in our heels when we think we're right, especially when the other person seems just as smart and well-informed as we are.
It is. And this raises the question of whether we tend to give our own beliefs special weight simply because they are ours.
Like we're more attached to our own beliefs because they're part of our identity in a way.
Exactly. And intellectual humility requires us to step back from that kind of ego-driven attachment and to evaluate beliefs based on their merits, not on who holds them.
So it's about prioritizing truth over ego,
Oh.
even when it's uncomfortable. Makes sense, but definitely easier said than done.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of self-awareness and a willingness to be wrong, but that's where the real intellectual growth happens.
Okay, so what are some of the key characteristics of intellectual humility, according to philosophers?
Well, Roberts and Wood describe it as valuing truth and understanding more than appearing to be right or knowledgeable. It's about having a low concern for intellectual status and a high concern for getting things right. And this includes being willing to revise your beliefs when presented with new evidence.
So it's about being more interested in learning than in being right.
That's a great way to put it. And Whitcomb and others describe it as limitations owning, meaning being aware of the boundaries of your own knowledge and not pretending to know more than you do.
So intellectual humility also has a strong element of honesty, being honest with yourself about what you do and don't know.
Exactly. And Dalmia connects intellectual humility to moral virtue, seeing it as a willingness to learn from others, an acknowledgement of our own fallibility, and a commitment to intellectual fairness.
So it's not just about being smart, but about being a good intellectual citizen, so to speak.
Exactly. And finally, there's open-mindedness, which is closely related to intellectual humility. It involves a willingness to consider different perspectives, even those that challenge your own, and to revise your beliefs in light of new evidence.
So it's about being intellectually flexible, not getting stuck in your own ways.
Precisely. Some philosophers see open-mindedness as purely an intellectual virtue, while others, like Arpely and McRae, argue that it also has a moral dimension, as it requires a certain detachment from your own viewpoint and a willingness to reconsider your own narratives about the world.
It's amazing how interconnected all these concepts are. Modesty, humility, intellectual humility, open-mindedness. They all seem to point toward this idea of being aware of our limitations, both moral and intellectual, and being open to learning and growth.
I agree. It's about approaching the world with a sense of curiosity and humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and being willing to learn from others.
This has been a truly deep dive. I feel like we've only just begun to explore the depths of these concepts.
It's true. Modesty and humility are far more complex than they might seem on the surface. They touch on so many fundamental aspects of human experience: how we see ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we make sense of the world around us.
So for you, the listener, I think the key takeaway here is that it's worth taking some time to reflect on what modesty and humility mean to you. What do they look like in your own life? Are they about what you believe about yourself, how you feel, or how you act? And does the context of a situation change how you approach these virtues?
Those are great questions to consider. And as our exploration today has shown, the philosophical inquiry into modesty and humility continues to offer valuable insights into what it means to be a good and knowledgeable person. So keep those questions in mind as you continue your own journey of self-discovery.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.